A world dimmed. In the year 536 AD, the world dimmed, a sun that glowed weakly in the sky, casting shadows as faint as whispers. It was a chilling year, when summer snow covered parched fields and the air held a biting chill unannounced by season. Across lands, farmers watched helplessly as crops shriveled, and hunger became an uninvited guest at every table. Desperate hands clawed at bark and weeds, anything to fill the void. Empires faltered, dreams of conquest crumbled, as stories filtered through quiet firesides about a lurking plague. A question echoed through time. Could this really be the world's end? Venture with us into the murky past, where Scotland in 1297 groans beneath the heavy boot of English rule, the English yoke. Under King Edward IV, a cunning sovereign with an insatiable appetite for control, the country is a reluctant participant in its own subjugation. Imagine a land where the very air vibrates with unvoiced anger, filled with thorny tensions, as green hills and misty highlands lie captive under the cold gaze of distant monarchs. The seeds of dissent lie buried beneath this picturesque surface, ready to sprout at the slightest provocation, for the Scots dwell in the shadow of harsh taxes and coerced loyalties. Edward's reign tightens its iron grip around Scotland, leaving it a mere vassal, dominated and drained. His presence is felt in every fortress dotting the lands, every garrison cramped with English soldiers. His influence hangs like a storm about to break. The oppressive weight of his rule resonates through silent fields and hushed clans, his orders ringing with the clang of authority. To the Scots, each tax resembles an insult, each demand a calculated act to strip them of dignity. Yet amid this dark tapestry, whispers of discontent swirl, whispers that band communities together in shared grievance and burgeoning rebellion. Whispers of discontent. The halls of Scotland's nobility echo with unrest, as if the ancient stones themselves shudder. Nobles find themselves ensnared in webs of loyalty, torn between the English crown and the simmering rebellion threatening their land. Where marriages and alliances once tied them to England, these bonds now threaten to choke their own people's autonomy. Tension ripples through secret meetings and whispered conversations where dreams of defiance and Scottish independence loom large. Rumors of rebellion stir amongst them, a shared siren song impossible to ignore. Life for the common folk, meanwhile, becomes a relentless challenge, a daily battle under this oppressive regime, struggling from dawn until dusk. Peasants labor only to see their harvest claimed by a faraway monarch nestled in unreachable castles. Traveling traders speak in lowered voices about failed harvests, blamed on distant wars, of families splintered by cruel conscription, and communities teetering on the edge of famine. Amidst this turmoil, Scottish customs strain against enforced English law. Their resistance masked in everyday acts of resilience, chants sung in the native tongue, forbidden festivals celebrated against the new order. Here lies a silent defiance, a people steadfast in their quest to retain their roots, holding their breath for a spark of change. In the heart of this troubled nation, tales by firelight keep the flame of rebellion burning. Wallace emerges. Stories of past heroes, passing through generations, sustain the spirit of defiance. These narratives, like embers in the night, feed the longing for liberty. Clandestine gatherings across moonlit glens witness bold oaths taken, whispers transforming into cries for action, a spark ready to set the countryside ablaze. Within this tapestry of hope and hardship, a formidable figure called William Wallace emerges to embody the spirit of Scotland. Wallace, a man cloaked equally in myth and reality, rises as the embodiment of resistance. His origins swirl with both rumor and legend, yet his impact is undeniable. Wallace captures hearts not through noble birthright, but through bold, relentless action, driving the fight for a liberated Scotland. For many Scots, a suffering people in search of a hero, Wallace morphs swiftly from man to myth, a living symbol of defiance against tyranny. Across the occupied lands, Wallace's name becomes a rallying point. Accounts of his daring raids ignite imaginations and stir hearts, his strategic mind and indomitable spirit emboldening even the most downtrodden, leveraging cunning tactics and fearless audacity. Rising tensions. Wallace becomes a lightning rod for revolt, urging the common folk to rally for the cause. He personifies hope, embodying a challenge to the impossible odds faced by a nation held in chains. As murmurs of rebellion gain strength, tensions rise to a breaking point. It is as if the land itself holds its breath, sensing the approach of conflict. In castle halls and village markets, anticipation hangs thickly, authorities finding their control slipping. English emissaries, once confident, sense the shift in the air. The rebellion no longer scuttling in shadows, but swelling with visible momentum. The English, perched distantly from the heart of Scottish unrest, tragically miscalculate the tenacity of those they sought to subdue, viewing the rebellion as minor flickers easily extinguished. Yet the fire within the Scots burns fiercely, her people united in resilience, shaped by centuries of adversity. English minds remain blind to this fervor, caught in a swirling symphony of missteps and oversight, even as support for Wallace surges across Scotland. History now stands on the precipice of change. Scotland's destiny, the storm clouds of rebellion looming large, Scottish resolve is solidifying into action, the path ahead paved by the spirit of resilience, embedded in every town and hamlet. And so unfolds our story, a tale not merely of battles, but of a nation's quest to reclaim its spirit under a luminous figure of resistance. Through adversities, across blood-stained bridges, against insurmountable odds, Scotland pursues its destiny, steeled by defiance and determination, from humble beginnings through embattled times. This is a narrative of courage and unity, a song of freedom that echoes across generations, ready to be told and retold until these echoes carve out a new future. William Wallace emerged from the mists of history as a figure both monumental and deeply human, his story echoing like a myth across Scotland's rugged landscapes. Born around 1270, Wallace hailed from the modest beginnings of a minor noble family in Elderslie, or possibly Ellerslie. The records are frustratingly vague, much like Scotland's misty moors. His father, Sir Malcolm Wallace, found himself engaged in the ceaseless struggle against Scottish clan rivalries and English interference. Early life and education. A struggle that would echo through young William's life as stories of heroism and resistance became nightly fireside tales. Wallace's upbringing, enriched by a rudimentary education likely overseen by the church, set the stage for a leader who was to carve his path not through noble titles, but by the blade and the burning urge for freedom. In this medieval world, where life was dictated by the sword's edge and survival was an art unto itself, Wallace's early years remain largely undocumented. Yet one might imagine the teachings of his clerical uncle, offering him lessons in both piety and poetry, tools that would later become vital as he rallied the Scottish heart. While Southern Europe danced to the tune of Renaissance humanism, Wallace's Scotland was unrelenting, occupied by the immediate concerns of raids and disputes, where younger sons often found themselves with little inheritance, but boundless potential. Thus, amid a cacophony of clashing swords and whispered ambitions, Wallace walked a thorny path shaped by necessity as much as destiny. Rebel or renegade, readying himself for a life defined by vendetta and vision. Who was he? Rebel or renegade? For Wallace, the demarcation was blurred, with fate casting him as both outlaw and hero. Personal vendettas, simmering from the alleged murder of his wife, Marion Braidfute, a catalyst more dramatic in later romances, set him towards a path of rebellion against English rule. Whether due to a particular skirmish or gradual grievances, Wallace soon found himself declared an outlaw by the English, transforming from nobleman into a symbol of resistance, whose actions, whether seen as theft or tactical counterstrikes, resonated deeply with a subjugated populace. His outlaw status liberated him from traditional obligations, allowing Wallace to metamorphose into a force of broader defiance. A folk hero to the Scots and a notorious insurgent to English eyes, Wallace's rise was not born from chivalric battles, but from shrewd guerrilla warfare. Amidst Scotland's inhospitable terrains, Wallace utilized the land as a formidable ally, unleashing hit-and-run tactics against the cumbersome English forces accustomed to more formal confrontations. Guerrilla warfare and personal loss. Early raids, such as the 1297 attack on Lanark, showcased his incisive strategy. Swift strikes followed by retreat into familiar wilderness, leaving the English flummoxed and floundering. In these early skirmishes, Wallace proved himself a pioneer of what would now be known as insurgent warfare. Choosing to engage on his terms, he transformed Scotland's geography into its most potent weapon. Beyond his martial mettle, Wallace's allegedly personal loss mirrored the collective anguish of occupied Scotland. Whether or not Wallace's wife existed, her purported murder symbolizes the direct human cost of English dominion, evoking a sense of shared suffering that coalesced beneath Wallace's leadership. His defiance was not just personal vendetta, it thrummed with the lived experiences of countless Scots burdened by oppressive taxation and foreign rule, gradually transforming grievances into a fervent call for reprisal. Wallace's rhetoric was enriched by an education believed to have been fostered by the clergy. Such an education equipped him with critical thinking, an understanding of various languages, and the ability to engage not just with swords, but eloquence, diplomacy, and vision. In a nation where literacy was sparse, his scholarly background forged indispensable bridges between common fighters and doubtful nobility, a fusion of might and mind uncommonly found within leaders of his time. Wallace navigated the tangled web of Scottish politics with deftness, engaging the divided nobility through not only bold actions, but clever diplomacy. While some Scottish lords remained loyal to the English, Wallace's leadership engendered allegiance through inspiration more than obligation. His tenacity appealed even to those wary of unbridled rebellion, fostering an image of unity, however fragile, against the English juggernaut. His efforts were a delicate dance, courting the nobility while steadfastly championing the cause of the common folk. Wallace's ambitions were shaped by more than immediate victories. He envisioned a free Scotland rooted in its own identity and culture, a nation knit together not by conquest but common cause. Through ceaseless campaigning, Wallace imparted a sense of agency and dignity, evoking a vision of self-governance that tethered the disparate strands of Scottish life, myth, and legacy. As Wallace's story unfurled across the land, myth began to intertwine with history. His exploits, recounted by singers and chroniclers alike, seized the Scottish imagination, transforming him into a near-mythic hero, embodying the rugged resistance that remained defiantly unyielding. This image of Wallace surged through the centuries, feeding the fires of subsequent struggles for independence, his life becoming a lodestone of Scottish identity, an enduring symbol of relentless determination, casting a shadow that looms large even today. The English crown, swollen with confidence and blind to the rising embers of rebellion, regarded Scotland as little more than a troublesome borderland. Edward I considered this northern neighbor a minor inconvenience, a patchwork realm where petty power struggles were more common than unity. Dispatching a force led by John de Warenne, the Earl of Surrey, and Hugh de Cressingham was, in his mind, akin to sending in pest control, a swift remedy to a momentary nuisance. They anticipated that a mere glimpse of their military might would dissolve any meaningful resistance. English miscalculation. Marching north, the English forces carried with them the air of predictable dominance. Scotland, perceived as a land fractured by internal squabbles, seemed easy prey under the sway of English imperial might. They believed that showing superior force would suffice to quash any disjointed resistance led by figures like William Wallace and Andrew Moray. As they advanced, they failed to see the unity brewing amongst the Scots, a burgeoning solidarity born from shared suffering. Their assumptions, clouded by arrogance, left them deaf to the rumors of rebellion, ignorant of the traps laid beneath the cloak of Scotland's misty highlands. John de Warenne, a man both seasoned and fatigued by years in England's service, approached this campaign with a sense of duty rather than zeal. His reputation, once burnished by peacetime exploits, now hung in the balance with Scotland's unrest posing a blemish. To him, Wallace's uprising was a mere ripple on a calm pond, not a tidal wave of change. Warenne's mindset was ill-suited for the unconventional warfare that Wallace and Moray perfected, as he underestimated the depth of Scottish resolve. The despised tax collector, his soldiers, weighed down by assumptions of superiority, became blind to the guerrilla tactics that awaited them. Hugh de Cressingham, known more as a tax collector than a wartime tactician, embodied the economic squeeze placed upon Scotland by the English crown. His mere presence underscored England's emphasis on financial control over strategic military leadership. Cressingham was despised for his harsh taxation, and he became a lightning rod for Scottish fury. Lacking battlefield acumen, his involvement was more about affirming England's stranglehold over Scotland's purse strings than contributing any tactical brilliance. The Scots saw him as a symbol of their oppression, further fueling their desire for dignity and self-rule. As the English advanced, their strategy, riddled with arrogance, failed to account for the unforgiving Scottish terrain and the fierce resistance it fostered. Troops moved with blinders on, driven by past victories rather than current realities. They waded into Scotland's landscape, assuming their numbers and equipment would secure an easy victory. The strategic bridge, yet they neglected the cunning of Wallace, whose mastery of terrain and psychological warfare created a battlefield that sang to Scotland's advantage. The chosen site of the impending clash, a narrow bridge over the River Forth near Stirling, was no mere coincidence. It was a masterstroke of strategy, turning the tables on the English by neutralizing their numerical advantage through a narrow chokehold. Here, Wallace favored ingenuity over sheer numbers, crafting a game of chess with flesh and iron, where the English moved unknowingly toward checkmate. The English campaign brushed off vital concerns of supply logistics and distances, oversights that would unravel their advantages. Their march depended on stretched supply lines that faltered in Scotland's harsh environment. With every step north, their dependency grew fraught, exposing them to raids and provocations by nimble Scots. Supply disruptions penetrated English ranks with creeping anxiety, an emotional chasm forming amidst dwindling provisions. Wallace's forces loomed like phantoms, turning logistics into a weapon, amplifying English unease as their campaign stalled against unseen foes. Overconfidence and oversight. They bore the weight of overconfidence, expectation seeping into every footfall, cloaked in assumptions of triumph. This misjudgment became their Achilles heel, blinding them to the realities of Scottish resistance and unforgiving Highland terrain. Voices within their ranks attempted warning, advocating for flexibility and caution, but were drowned out by the chorus of certainty. Hierarchical structures and rigid plans muffled experienced insights, further compounding their errors. The myth of Scottish inferiority had long pervaded English thoughts, imbued with prejudice and underselling Scots as primitive and disorganized. Yet here, on the cusp of Stirling, those views would be shattered. The Scots, painted as inferior, stood ready to rewrite this narrative through courage and cunning, poised to challenge misconceptions penned by distant scribes. As the English troops plodded closer to Stirling Bridge, their ignorance shaped a tragedy in the making. They stumbled toward fate, uncertain of the storm brewing just beyond their vision. Wallace emerged not merely as a rebel leader, but as an emblem of change, steering the axe blade of history toward England's hubris. The dawn of battle. The curtain was rising on a play they never rehearsed, where the hard lessons of underestimation and misplaced confidence awaited them, ready to be etched into the annals of legacy. As dawn broke over Stirling Bridge, the sun's rays fought their way through a heavy mist that hung like a curtain over the landscape. The River Forth lay beneath, a murmur that hinted at the day's wait, embodying both a natural boundary and a battlefield soon to be immortalized in legend. On this day, whispers of its significance stirred among the village folk, unaware that their world was on the brink of change. From their vantage point on a rise overlooking the river, William Wallace and Andrew Murray watched in silence. Their eyes, focused on the narrow bridge below, saw more than just a wooden structure. It was a symbol, a lifeline between oppression and a looming legacy of freedom. To them, it represented not only a tactical opportunity, but also the collective grievances of a subjugated nation now ready to resist. The bridge, swallowed and revealed by the weaving mist, carried a life of its own, poised to change the course of history, a testament to strategy. The battlefield before them was a testament to strategy and vision. Wallace and Murray recognized what many military minds of their time might have overlooked: the limitations of the narrow bridge, designed for simple crossings, not the force of an army. The English, under the command of John de Warenne and Hugh de Cressingham, saw the bridge merely as an obstacle, oblivious to its true strategic potential. For Wallace, the bridge was a tool, an unwitting ally in their defiance. The Scots had the advantage, not just physically, but spiritually, driven by necessity and a yearning for sovereignty. The English, meanwhile, approached with a mix of overconfidence and routine, Their traditional tactics and vast numbers seemed invulnerable in capability. They considered Wallace's defiance little more than a spark flaring before being inevitably extinguished. Assured of their dominance, they were blind to the trap set for them in the natural bottleneck of the bridge. Their reliance on strength over strategic adaptability would soon be tested in this crucible of survival and skill. The advance. As the English began their crossing, the bridge transformed from a mere structure into a stage vibrating under the weight of its cast. The percussion of marching feet, creaking wood, and clanking armor filled the morning air, each sound a harbinger of what was to come. The bridge stretched into the distance, a seemingly endless passage enveloped in fog. For the soldiers advancing, it was a corridor into uncertainty. Wallace and Moray stood ready, their men positioned with patience, honed by years of unseen skirmishes. They held their ground, knowing each step taken by the English was a step deeper into a well-laid strategy. The mist swirling above seemed almost magical, an ethereal ally obscuring their enemy's sight and enhancing their own sense of readiness. This was more than just mist. It was a mystical presence that in the years to follow would be woven into tales of valor and mysticism, an integral part of the legend. Whispers would later speak of Wallace commanding its presence, utilizing ancient rites to cloak the bridge in secrecy, myth and the mystical. These stories, whether true or mere fragments of embellished history, would lend the battle an air of the fantastical. The surrounding forest, dense and foreboding, was both an actor and audience in this unfolding drama. The Scots found refuge there, hidden amongst the trees that stood sentinel like wise elders. To the English, these woods were simply scenery, underestimated and ignored. Yet for the Scots, every rustle was a secret shared, a language of survival and resistance learned over generations. The English, advancing in blissful ignorance, underestimated this silent ally, blind to the ambush seated within its shade. The stakes at Stirling Bridge hovered like the very mist filling the valley. For Wallace and Moray, defeat was not just personal, it was an existential threat to their cause, the end of a dream for an independent Scotland. Victory, on the other hand, offered a tangible shift in power dynamics, a defiance no longer whispered but shouted across the land. The English, confident in their supremacy, failed to see that faltering here would embolden Scottish resistance far beyond this solitary battle. The charge. With the bridge groaning under the weight of their enemy's advance, the Scots awaited the moment to release their pent-up fury. When it came, a cry splitting the fog, their charge was a surge of disciplined chaos. Witnesses on the ground might have likened it to an unstoppable natural force, nature reclaiming its dominion through the clashing of arms and cries of warriors. The English, ensnared, found themselves trapped in a rush of strategies unraveling into pandemonium. The tumult subsided, leaving a haunting, heavy silence. It was an absence of sound that carried the essence of sacrifice. As whispers of courage and defiance lingered in the air, Wallace and Moray, standing in this stillness, recognized the victory's significance. It was more than territory gained. It was a statement of resilience and the dawning of a new chapter in Scotland's saga. The Battle of Stirling Bridge became a narrative of legend, a testament to strategic ingenuity and the indomitable will of a nation. Wallace's legacy, bound to the wooden planks of a simple bridge, symbolized the spirit of a people unwilling to accept defeat, a spirit that transcended its own time. The echoes of victory, and so the echoes of Stirling, would reverberate through the annals of history, a whisper of resistance that continued to inspire long after the battle's echoes had faded into the Scottish mist. As dawn crept over Stirling, the mist clung low, shrouding the landscape in an ethereal cloak. On one side of the River Forth, William Wallace and Andrew Moray stood with their soldiers, eyes locked on the narrow bridge that separated them from the English troops. This wasn't just a crossing, it was a carefully chosen stage for an audacious plan. The Scots, seeing beyond the timber and water, had laid a trap cunning enough to take advantage of the very terrain itself. It was a gambit that relied not on force alone, but on the cunning anticipation of a predator waiting in the reeds. The sounds of a crow calling and the clink of armor in the distance startled in the chill air. Across the river, English forces, accustomed to easily sweeping aside rebellion, were poised with misguided confidence. John de Warenne and Hugh de Cressingham expected a routine display of superiority, yet their perception, clouded by years of dominance, missed the quiet desperation fueling the Scots' resolve. Single-minded determination. This wasn't merely a skirmish for Wallace and Moray. This was the moment when their people's bondage might finally be shattered. Their ranks held single-minded determination, with eyes gleaming as they glimpsed emancipated futures beneath the rising sun. The Scottish warriors stood silent and watchful atop the damp high ground, cloaks drawn tight against the biting morning air. Stillness blanketed them, a distilled patience waiting to uncoil. Every heartbeat echoed like the promise of an impending storm, carrying the tension of raindrops hovering on the brink of release. They knew that a signal from their leaders would transform them into a symphony of war, each man playing a vital role in this mission for liberty. Below, the English began to move, casually threading onto the narrow bridge. Their chatter and the rustle of gear were muted by fog. Unaware of the gaze fixated upon them, they were like a serpent slipping blindly into a trap. The bridge was a funnel, luring them into a precarious position that left them exposed. The unfolding trap. Wallace sensed the moment drawing close when their opportunity would come and the Scots would spring forth, their dominance unleashed in a torrent of calculated chaos. Wallace's whispered command to advance rippled through the Scottish ranks like a stone dropped into a pond. Energy surged as men moved forward with the precision of a finely tuned machine. The fog aided their stealth, turning them into phantoms that materialized suddenly beside their prey. Their approach was more than a charge. It was an orchestrated explosion of pent-up power, a predator leaping upon its unsuspecting quarry. The Scots descended upon the bridge with ferocity, a chorus of shouts and the clash of steel shattering the morning calm. Arrows flew, spears thrust, and English troops caught off guard found escape routes blocked by their own numbers. Panic spread, fueled by the immediate realization that their powerful forward momentum had become a lethal trap. Scottish warriors cut through the melee, relentless and methodical, turning the battlefield into a stage for their burgeoning legend. Blood on the earth. The battle cries of the Scots were a haunting declaration, binding their resolve and rebellion into the misty air. Here, amidst the clash of iron and cries of warfare, blood mingled with the earth, sealing their claims on the land beneath them. The scene was a dramatic embodiment of their defiance, a testament to a nation's fight against oppression. Amid the chaos, the English soldiers found themselves on unsteady ground. They tumbled into the river or crumpled beneath Scottish blades, their arms and armor inadequate against the Scots' agile assaults. Desperation filled the air, a blend of sweat and fear as men wrestled with life and death. Commands from English leaders faded into insignificance against the determined onslaught. The narrow bridge now served as a brutal choke point. Designed for knights to cross two at a time, it now held back a flood of soldiers. Scottish archers positioned high-showered arrows on the clustered English, each shot a messenger of death. Those trapped did battle as much against each other as against the Scots, caught in an inevitable tightening vice, unity and valor. But the Scots weren't just skilled fighters, they were a unified force, driven by shared suffering and hope. Every sword swung spoke of years underfoot and dreams newly born. Among them, stories of personal valor emerged, tales of men holding ground against knights in armor, leveraging wits and will over armor and mounts. Wallace and Moray's leadership here was a living testament to strategy and execution, binding their people into a cohesive force that overwhelmed a divided enemy. Below, the river Forth flowed cold and indifferent, sweeping the unfortunate into its icy embrace. Armor made it impossible for many to climb back from its depths, becoming an ally to the Scots by carrying their foes away. For those still on the bridge, the river's presence was a dark reminder of the price of error. Soon the English resistance faltered, the commanding voices snuffed out by the chaos. Structure imploded beneath the weight of unexpected ferocity, authority eroding like sandcastles in a rising tide. Wallace and Moray seized the moment, guiding their battered but victorious troops to stand firm as the din of battle faded, a Scotland reborn. As the mist lifted, revealing the toll of the morning's fury, the Scots emerged on their homeland, breathless but triumphant. Their victory was more than survival. It was a pivot in history's great arc. From the blood-soaked banks of the River Forth, a nation awakened, emboldened by the echoes of valor and sacrifice. The legacy of Wallace and Moray was not just a battle won, but a Scotland reborn amid the tendrils of dawn and destiny. In the midst of 1297 Scotland, the name Hugh de Cressingham echoed with trepidation. As the English treasurer for Edward the Ferns, he was the epitome of unyielding fiscal tyranny. With relentless zeal, he extracted taxes that were no mere coins to him, but lifelines fueling England's war machine. To the Scots, he was a predator, consuming without empathy. Each pound collected a painful reminder of foreign rule. Cressingham's devotion to his duty reflected rigid principles. He likely believed he championed justice, seeing order and prosperity in the gold streaming into English coffers. Yet to those he oppressed, he was not an administrator, but a tyrant, his actions sparking fires of rebellion in countless hearts. Cressingham's end. The morning of September 11th, 1297, blanketed in the chill of the River Forth mists, marked a pivotal clash. As treasurer and confidant of King Edward, Cressingham stood on the battlefield, perhaps with an air of misplaced confidence over these barbaric Scots. As both English and Scottish forces prepared, an air crackling with the tension of the impending battle enveloped them. Little did he or his compatriots know, this day would etch his end into grisly legend. The Scots, driven by fury against the treasurer's fiscal iron fist, had marked him a high-priority target. The rumors of his demise, skinned and his hide made into sword belts, may be hyperbole, but underscore the ferocity of Scottish anger and the symbolic nature of his death. The battle unfolded, and what was supposed to be an orchestrated English victory unraveled instead into chaos. Ambushed with cunning, the English ranks crumbled in the face of terrain wielded as a weapon by the Scots. Steel clashed amidst cries, and the air filled with the scent of fear and iron. Amidst the fray, de Cressingham's fate was sealed, justice and retribution. His death becoming a vivid mosaic of justice, victory, and retribution. For the Scots, it was not merely about vanquishing an enemy, but symbolizing the broader decline of English tyranny. To the Scottish warriors, de Cressingham was not merely a foe, but a physical manifestation of all those years of suffering. His death was personal and profound, an act that resonated through their collective soul. The tale of sword belts from his skin, whether fact or myth, illustrates the depths of emotion and desire for vengeance. Medieval customs sometimes embrace brutal acts as rites of catharsis and retribution. Such violent reprisals speak to the era's extremes, where victories were imbued with both hope and the rawness of survival. Beyond personal vendettas, the battle marked a monumental shift. The triumph at Stirling Bridge defied both expectations and historical norms. Under William Wallace and Andrew Moray, Scottish forces proved that strategy and spirit could trump sheer numbers. The victory dismantled the notion of English invincibility, shaking the edifice of oppression that had long loomed over Scotland. An awakening. This wasn't just a temporary win. This was an awakening. Retreating English forces left behind chaos, a scattering of leadership, and a bolstering of Scottish morale. Cressingham's fall reverberated through England, shattering more than their military composure. It was a painful revelation for Edward the Stern, who faced the unsettling truth that his strategies could crumble under the pressure of determined and cunning foes. For the Scots, this event fueled a narrative stretching beyond the fields of battle. Tales of resilience and hope whispered in the dark corners of taverns. Cressingham inadvertently became a linchpin in galvanizing Scottish unity, turning what was a personal vendetta into a rallying point for broader rebellion. Legends like those surrounding Cressingham's demise grow tendrils of truth amidst a canopy of myth, coloring public perception. Exaggerations were tools wielded not just to incite fear, but to spark inspiration and unity. As stories spread by word of mouth, they solidified public morale, blending the line between reality and narrative artistry. The power of myth. The myth of Cressingham underscores psychological warfare's role in medieval conflicts. It wasn't just about swords, but stories, the lifeblood of cultural resistance. The Scots discovered unity in victory, a shared identity against the specter of conquest. Realizing the power of collective endeavor, Wallace and Moray rose from mere leaders to symbols of possibility. The battle at Stirling forged a newfound fraternity among the clans, a shared understanding that their future lay in their own hands, fortified by courage and hope. In the end, Hugh de Cressingham's name transcended that of a stranded treasurer and became a cautionary tale for tyrants across time. He stood as the villainous face of oppression in Scottish narrative, a reminder that even the mightiest could fall. His life and death, wrapped in both the brutal reality and poetic myth, serve as a testament to the enduring spirit of human resistance and the power of community united by hardship. The aftermath. As tales of Cressingham's end crossed generations, they painted not just a picture of vengeance, but of histories shaped by those bold enough to grasp their destiny. As the sun dipped low on that fateful day, the English forces found themselves in disarray, their orderly ranks reduced to a panicked scramble for survival. The narrow bridge, once an entryway to conquest, now served as a bottleneck of retreat, a scene of trampling men and bolting horses with banners forsaken in the mud. The air was charged with the raw intensity of Scottish war cries, each shout piercing the chaos and reinforcing the palpable fear among the fleeing English soldiers. Amid the cacophony, a realization settled in like a leaden cloak. Their underestimation of the Scots had sealed their fate. In the shadows of dusk, as word of the victory spread like wildfire through the towns and villages surrounding Stirling, the bells tolled in a triumphant symphony. This was more than a battlefield triumph. It marked a seismic shift in power, a retreat not merely of bodies but of oppressive influence. The English soldiers, many strangers to this tenacious land, retreated not just physically but in mindset, aware now of the indomitable spirit they had challenged and found superior. The cost of freedom. The battlefield post-conflict was a gruesome testament to the high cost of freedom. Scottish and English bodies lay thick upon the ground, narratives of loyalty and unfinished tales extinguished in the fervor of combat. Amongst the victorious Scots, there prevailed a solemn acknowledgement of lives lost on both sides, an ode to the terrible price of liberation, paid not in gold but in human lives. Yet with this grim landscape came an understanding. The freedom they pursued demanded sacrifices, and here was only the first blood as currency. Economically, the defeat at Stirling Bridge proved a substantial blow to English pride and will. The Scots, scavenging through the aftermath, gathered arms and armor, knowing they had struck England where it hurt, beyond mere treasure and pride. North of the border, those in power scrambled to reassess the underestimated threat. Scotland was no longer a sideline irritant, but a formidable actor on the stage of territorial contests. With the bloom of victory, the legend of William Wallace swelled beyond rebellion into guardianship. Wallace transitioned from a guerrilla tactician to a national hero, a beacon of defiance whose leadership underlined the very essence of Scottish gallantry. Wallace, the Guardian, he was no longer just a man on the battlefield, but a symbol of resistance itself. Entrusted now with the title of Guardian, Wallace shouldered a mantle heavy with expectation, becoming a conduit for national aspirations, even as he faced the daunting task of organizing a resilient stand against inevitable English reprisals. Stirling was a catalyst not just for military triumph, but within the societal veins of Scotland. Across the land, the victory softened feuds and rivalries, uniting clans towards a shared cause, self-determination. A newfound unity took root, binding men under Wallace's banner, infusing the concept of Scotland with renewed vitality. A vision of a nation formed in crucible moments such as this. This victory also challenged staunch societal barriers, sneaking across class divides with whispered promises of common purpose. In taverns and market squares, tales of unity and rebellion abounded. Scotland's victory felt communal, a woven narrative larger than any single clan or class, filling a void of hope and igniting embers of independence aspirations into shared belief. English reassessment. Meanwhile, in England, the court and Edward Merce advisors wrestled with the sting of defeat, confronting a sorely underestimated enemy. The realization dawned that brute force alone would not quell this northern insurrection, necessitating a strategy grounded in respect and cunning equal to the Scots' audacity. This meant wrestling with the sobering truth that England's approach toward Scotland needed more adaptable, comprehensive tactics than previously conceded. Stirling was not just a military escapade, rather it transformed into a lesson for military scholars on the interplay of terrain and strategy over sheer numbers. The bridge, once a mere structure, became a profound symbol of strategic genius, a lesson in leveraging the landscape to turn foes inward upon themselves. Even beyond Scotland and England, the ripples reached continental shores, catching the interest of far-flung monarchies absorbed in their own battles of power and sovereignty. International impact. Wallace's improbable success invited intrigue, encouraging foreign eyes to reconsider alliances and the delicate balances in their own dominions. The reverberations from Stirling suggested that even a smaller, seemingly weaker opponent could execute a calculated shift in power dynamics. The myth of Wallace resonated as an uncontainable force across fields and fires, a legend that transcended military exploits to inspire future rebellions against tyranny. His figure shone in tales, transcending epics as fighters of all kinds drew notes of inspiration from his narrative. A double-edged sword indeed, promising both hope and challenge. Ultimately, the Battle of Stirling Bridge marked a significant turning point, a historical hinge upon which the story of Scottish independence swung. It underscored a pivotal crossing from mere rebellion to a fuller understanding of nationhood, highlighting collective bravery amid deep reflection on the broader trajectory toward freedom. As memories of that misted dawn wove into the Scottish consciousness, they did so not just as a moment of pride, but as a bedrock of identity, courage, strategy, and unyielding resistance. Wallace's genius. In the fog-laden air of September 11, 1297, William Wallace stood with Andrew Murray by his side, ready to challenge the English at Stirling Bridge. This wasn't a clash destined for time-worn tactics of steel-clad knights and cavalry charges. No, Wallace understood the dramatic artistry needed to transform medieval combat, using the landscape to his advantage and rewiring the principles of war itself. Beneath the mist, this narrow wooden bridge became an unlikely ally, a stage where Wallace choreographed a battle of cunning over brute force. The restrictive geography ensured the English forces, abundantly confident, were funneled into a choke point, stripped of their numbers advantage. The river, the dense fog, all were elements in Wallace's symphony of warfare. Patience here was as sharp as any blade, a concept palpable enough to transform even the most fearsome of English knights into hesitant specters, uncertain of the ground beneath their feet. Wallace wielded the natural landscape like a weapon, his strategy a masterstroke of guerrilla warfare. Where others saw barriers in the land, Wallace saw opportunity, terrain as an ally. The rugged Scottish highlands, intimidating to outsiders, were as familiar to him as the lines on his hand. This environment, unfriendly and craggy, became his secret weapon, playing to the strengths of his forces. His men moved with agility through the terrain, vanishing like shadows in the mist while launching surprise attacks that left the English struggling to regroup. Stirling Bridge became a crucial part of this strategy, turning an unavoidable crossing into a field of annihilation. Discipline held this chaos together. Wallace drilled his men not just in arms, but in unity and resolve. Amidst galloping horses and the clangor of clashing swords, his troops were like a well-tuned instrument. They weren't just following orders. They were a synchronized force, anticipating each other's moves. The English found themselves in disarray, their attempts to counter thwarted at every turn, in awe of a force that acted like a singular entity rather than scattered combatants. Yet deception played one of the most critical roles in Wallace's success: deception and fear. By creating an illusion of a larger force, Wallace tricked the English, steering them into false confidence. They misjudged his army's size and intent, and when they realized their error, it was too late. The trap had been sprung at Stirling, where Wallace's patience gave way to a fierce counterattack as enough English soldiers had crossed. Trapped between the river and the blade, their overconfident assumptions unraveled in an instant. What truly set the Scots apart was their leader's talent for instilling fear, transforming it into a weapon as potent as any spear. Before the charge sounded, silence fell, an eerie quiet that only heightened the anticipation of unseen assaults. The sudden Scottish war cries echoed like some otherworldly presence, chilling the blood of men who'd thought themselves conquerors. Through darkness and mist, the sweep of Scottish blades struck swift, spreading panic faster than rumor in medieval markets. Fear rippled through the English ranks, unraveling their morale before a single blow fell. A people's army, their minds unprepared for the ghostly resistance they faced. More than just a minor noble, Wallace rallied the common folk, farmers, shepherds, and laborers who knew the land's worth. No feudal summons brought them to his side. It was shared belief in Scotland's freedom. Under Wallace's command, these men became an unconventional army, imbued with purpose. While English knights charged across fields, these Scots silhouettes blended with woods, striking not for glory, but for every inch of homeland they held dear. The partnership with Andrew Moray was instrumental, a shining example of strategic unity. Together, they orchestrated maneuvers that confounded their larger foes. As English boots first clattered upon the bridge, it was Moray who kept an eye on their number, while Wallace poised his forces, ready to strike. Their collaboration was seamless, allowing for precision that typified larger forces, proving once again that size mattered less than synergized minds wielding it in harmony. At Stirling Bridge, Wallace dared to dismantle traditional warfare's broad strokes. Central to the bloody norm was a knightly valor and frontal charge. Yet Wallace's tactics replaced these with a calculation and adaptability that turned unwitting English strengths into glaring vulnerabilities. Tactical innovation. This victory didn't just hinge on numbers. It was a sound rebuke of the old order, setting a precedent that reshaped how battles would be conceived, fought, and won. The aftershocks reverberated through history, echoing the past into the arms of future military minds who saw in Wallace's brilliance the roadmap to defeating a mightier foe. Historians today gaze backward, seeing in Wallace's genius both a rallying cry for Scottish identity and a textbook of tactical prowess. Modern tacticians nod to Stirling Bridge as a precursor to asymmetric warfare, proving that intelligence, spirit, and terrain could deflate even the grandest adversary. More than a warrior of legend, Wallace was a harbinger of modern military strategy, carving out not just victories, but lessons through cunning, tenacity, and the powerful, intangible force of the human will. The victory at Stirling Bridge reverberated across Scotland, setting the land ablaze with tales of bravery and cunning. Villages and towns teemed with a vibrant energy as news of the triumph spread. This was no ordinary military win. It was a heartfelt resurgence for a nation long oppressed. With the air thick with the scent of hearth fires, taverns resounded with ballads celebrating Wallace and his men. Celebration and legend. Minstrels fashioned these tales into epics where valor stood tall against overwhelming odds. Children listened wide-eyed as elders wove stories of the battle, embellishing it with each retelling and transforming it into the mythic fabric that a weary populace so desperately needed. Church bells ricocheted through the air, their clanging a melody of hope, reaching every ear, even those distant from the battlefield's echoes. For the ordinary Scots, this was a victory they adopted as a personal triumph. While the nobility wrangled over political implications, the common folk reveled in the streets, feeling as though they had wielded the swords themselves. Through these celebrations, the battle became more than history. It became legend imprinted on every heart. In the aftermath, Wallace emerged not just as a victorious leader, but as a living legend, a figure infused with the dreams and aspirations of the Scottish people. He became an emblem of defiance, his feats whispering through the streets and halls of Scotland. Wallace was more than a man. He was myth, a near-mythical hero resisting the tides of domination. His narrative, passed from lip to ear, echoed with the hope of sovereignty, rallying a fragmented nation under the banner of freedom. This shift was not merely in how Wallace was perceived, but within the very psyche of the Scots themselves. Once England's dominion had seemed insurmountable, an iron fist ruling over them, shattering illusion. Yet the victory shattered this illusion, painting the English as fallible and breakable. Stirling Bridge became the fulcrum for a mental revolution. The people began to see themselves not as victims, but as architects of their destiny. This newfound confidence invigorated not just the warriors, but every farmer, artisan, and townsman. The impossible now seemed within arm's reach, infusing everyday life with an invigorating spirit of resilience. Wallace's triumph briefly offered unity, a thread binding various clans and nobility, setting aside age-old rivalries in favor of a grander cause. This temporary alignment demonstrated what a united Scotland could achieve against a common foe. Yet the fabric of unity was delicate, threatened by bygone grudges and the nobles' own tethered loyalties to England. Even so, the victory momentarily eclipsed these divisions, creating a rare camaraderie among desperate factions. Economically, the impact was as contrasting as the Scots themselves. For local merchants, the victory heralded an uptick in trade, infusing life into markets and creating a wave of optimism within the bespectacled hamlets and towns. Economic impact and propaganda. However, this prosperity was uneven. Looming threats of English reprisals hung over Scotland like an unyielding shadow, deterring sustainable growth. The nobles faced dilemmas over lands and wealth, while peasant lives plodded on precariously amid wars and uncertainties. Propaganda seized upon Wallace's victory to fortify morale, shaping narratives with precision. Words spread through songs and stories, crafted to cast a triumph as a divinely favored act of justice. While literacy and dialect barriers limited the reach, these tales still gripped the imagination, strengthening Wallace's legend and galvanizing public resolve. Beyond Scotland's borders, Stirling Bridge drew eyes internationally, hinting at new opportunity amid England's perceived vulnerability. Foreign attention, however, was a double-edged sword, offering potential allies, yet exposing Scotland to the unpredictable web of medieval politics. Alliances promised increased resources, but came with caveats of fleeting trust, necessitating careful diplomacy amid shifting sands of power. Amidst these upheavals, Wallace confronted profound expectations. The weight of expectation, the beacon of hope. Stirling Lit became a weighty crown. Failure was not an option in a land now bristling with a yearning for self-determination. To uphold this legacy, he faced the intricate dance of maintaining unity while preparing for inevitable English retaliation, whose anger had not dimmed but sharpened. In England, plans brewed and armor was forged anew for the assault to reclaim control. Scotland braced for this deluge. In reflection, Stirling Bridge transformed into more than a battle. It was a declaration, a memorable tapestry of courage, overcoming fear, and unity from division. Its cultural resonance stretched beyond mere military genius, symbolizing a struggle for justice. Its echoes ripple through time, a testament to resistance that outlived the medieval world. Stirling's tale became a chronicle of defiance, a reminder that the indomitable spirit can endure through the ages, lighting the path for those grappling with their fight for identity, sovereignty, and survival. A crucible of destiny. On a mist-laden morning, the River Forth lay cloaked in an eerie silence that masked the tumult of thoughts and feelings swirling among the men who awaited the clash. This place, where the air was heavy with unspoken hopes and fears, wasn't just a battlefield, but a crucible for forging destinies, a site charged with the latent energy of a land yearning for freedom. Only the distant clatter of hooves and the faint rustling of armor broke the oppressive quiet, setting the stage for a legendary conflict. Stirling was more than a point on the map. It was the heart of Scotland's aspirations, a symbol of dignity and the right to self-determination, a stand against English subjugation. As the mist turned golden with the rising sun, the Scots readied themselves to break the chains of oppression, while the English, arrogantly misjudging their opponents, prepared to enforce their rule. Within this theater of battle, William Wallace emerged not merely as a warrior, but as a tactician of impressive brilliance, strategic mastery. His rugged exterior belied an uncanny military insight that made Stirling a showcase of strategic ingenuity grounded in the terrain's unique features. Recognizing that a straightforward battle would lead to disaster against the English might, Wallace transformed the narrow bridge over the River Forth into a crucible of destruction. He played on the English confidence, leading them into a fatal trap. The bridge, a seemingly mundane obstacle, became a deadly funnel, splitting the English forces and rendering them vulnerable. As they advanced unsuspecting, Wallace's men unleashed a calculated fury from their elevated position, shattering the English ranks with precision. In an age obsessed with valor and direct combat, Wallace's cunning placed him firmly in the annals of warfare, illustrating the power of wit over sheer force. For all its triumph, the day did not escape its grim toll. The River Forth, its waters mingled with the blood of soldiers, bore silent testimony to the high cost of rebellion, the burden of loss. For Wallace and his men, Stirling was a baptism by fire, an initiation into a struggle more consuming and bloodier than they'd known. Each Scottish fighter understood that they fought not for land alone, but for a cause greater than themselves, a legacy for those who would tread this earth after them. The cries of the wounded echoing through the mist merged with the mournful sigh of the wind, serving as a dirge for fallen comrades. Wallace bore the weight of command, knowing that with every victory came the burden of loss. Each life extinguished was a poignant reminder of the resolve needed to walk the path laid down at Stirling, paving the way for future bold steps toward freedom. As the tumult of battle faded, an unsettling calm settled over Stirling's fields. The thrill of victory was tinged with the presence of those lost to the fight, their memories whispering in the quiet. For Wallace, recognized now as a guardian of the Scottish cause, this victory was bittersweet. As triumphant as it was, the victory was steeped in sacrifice, a reminder that each stride forward was shadowed by the cost of those who could not follow. From rebel to guardian, the haunting reality of leadership was clear. With each triumph, a part of humanity's essence was sacrificed, leaving behind echoes of loss amid the celebrations. This transformation of Wallace from rebel to revered leader, the guardian of Scotland, marked a shift in the rebellion's gravity. No longer merely an insurgent, Wallace was now a symbol, a beacon around which a fractured nation could rally. His mantle carried immense responsibility, requiring him to harness not just martial prowess, but also diplomatic acumen and visionary leadership. As a figurehead of the resistance, Wallace's strategic alliances and his ability to inspire collective resolve presented Scotland with not just a fleeting victory, but the burgeoning potential of a sustained movement, capable of facing the empire across the borders. Stirling's impact rippled far and wide, shaking English confidence in their martial dominance. King Edward the Foreigners, the formidable hammer of the Scots, found his authority challenged as Stirling exposed significant cracks in England's command and strategy. No longer could the Scots be dismissed as mere troublemakers. They were a potent force emboldened by the victory, confronting injustice. Stirling acted as a clarion call, instigating waves of unrest within England's grasp, prompting urgent deliberations on the sustainability and ethics of their occupation north of the border. The defeat at Stirling evoked a re-evaluation, casting a long shadow over their imperial aspirations. Yet what followed Stirling was not a song of uninterrupted glory, but the gritty reality of medieval conflict. Beyond the romantic tales, the battlefield embodied chaos, a brutal expanse where survival depended on luck as much as skill. Soldiers braved not just a clash of arms, but also the relentless advance of disease. For the common folk, the strife extended beyond combat, pressing them into hardship through displacement and scarcities. Yet amid this grim backdrop, Scottish resilience stood resilient, fostering a unity that transcended social divides, knitting together a war-torn land in pursuit of independence. As future generations look back, Stirling Bridge resonated as more than just a battle. It was a beacon for those who dare to confront injustice and seek liberty. The road ahead, the story of an underdog challenging a mighty empire, infused hope into movements worldwide, lighting the path for all who strive for self-determination. Stirling's victory was a poignant reminder that freedom's pursuit is fraught with trials, demanding unwavering commitment and unity to realize aspiration into reality. Though Stirling marked a watershed, it was merely the first step in a journey that demanded patience, sacrifice, and relentless determination. The road to Scottish sovereignty stretched beyond the horizon, requiring more than just bravery. It called for prudent strategy and a consolidated national will. With this victory, the Scots laid the foundation for future victories, understanding that each forward step, though fraught with challenges, moved them closer to their dream. As the bridge at Stirling transformed from a site of conflict into a passage toward a freer future, its legacy urged them onward in their quest. And thus concludes our tale at the crossing of Stirling Bridge, history written in blood, courage, and a dream that still inspires today. If you've enjoyed revisiting these medieval tales with us, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories from the shadowy corners of time.